Hey everybody, welcome to End Times Bible Study. My name's Diane, and this is an in-person live Bible study, and we meet once a week, and we are currently studying the book of Daniel, and tonight we will be finishing up with chapter 12. And so we live stream this through Facebook, and then it's posted to YouTube the next day. So welcome to anybody who joins in remotely, and thank you, and welcome to those of you who are here in person. So I'm going to make sure, speaking of this microphone, last week I was like, on the video, I didn't feel like my voice was very loud, so got to do a better job with that. All right, so we're looking at Daniel chapter 12, which contains amazing prophecy about the time of the end, which correlates with the 7-year tribulation, as well as the resurrection of the dead. I mean, some of the things we're going to talk about, and the timing of some of these events. So it's really fascinating. And just for a brief recap, so Daniel 10 through 12, those chapters, it's all part of the same narrative. And so this is Daniel's fourth and final vision, and it's in the 3rd year of King Cyrus of Persia. And Daniel's probably somewhere around 85 years old at this point, depending on how old he was when he was taken into exile by the Babylonians, when he was presumably a teenager. And then the Persians had conquered Babylon. And so, oh, sorry about that. We've got my daughter's dog down here. And Dean just walked in. The dog is very yappy. Bo, stop. Sorry, y'all. Hey, Dean, welcome. Yeah, he's not doing well. All right, put him on his leash and take him outside or something. Bo, settle down. So sorry if you're on the live stream. Okay. Yeah, and you guys help yourself to coffee and whatnot. We got some stuff here. So just giving a recap of last week, so you really haven't missed anything. All right. So, but anyways, so Daniel's probably around 85 or so. And then, so chapter 10 is like an introduction to the whole vision, and there's a vision of this mighty angel. And then really about chapter 11 is where the angel starts giving very detailed prophecies to Daniel. And so he covers information from the Persian Empire, information that's clearly Alexander the Great conquering the Persians, and then that gets divided into 4 empires. And then the rest of the chapter is really dealing with issues between the king of the north, which was the Seleucid Empire, and then the king of the south, which was the Ptolemy Empire, and that was like Egypt, and the king of the north was Syria and so forth, those general vicinities. So starting in verse 21 of chapter 11, though, it starts talking about a Seleucid king, Antiochus Epiphanes, and he persecuted the Jews and desolated their temple with the sacrifice of pigs and putting up a statue of Zeus and horrible things like that. So he appears to be a prototype of the Antichrist, and the Antichrist will rise to power as a one-world ruler during the final 7-year period prescribed for Israel. And the prophecy shifts from Antiochus to the Antichrist starting in verses 36 through 44. So from that point, that there is no historical fulfillment. Up until that, point of the prophecy, you can correlate historical events exactly with this prophecy, and it was incredibly accurate. And so we looked at all that in Daniel 11 parts 1 and 2. So tonight we're going to conclude with chapter 12, and we have to understand that in the context of chapters 10 and 11, because as I said, it's all part of the same narrative. So we'll start with chapter 12, verse 1. So at that time, Michael, the great prince who stands watch over your people, will rise up. There will be a time of distress, the likes of which will not have occurred from the beginning of the nations until that time. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. All right, so we're just going to kind of go a couple verses at a time, so we'll just start with that one. So he's talking about, this time at the end where Michael's going to rise up. So this appears that that, yeah, I mean, it's correlating with Daniel 11. Like, it's still the same period of time that's being talked about, like Daniel, you know, those last chapters, like 36 through 44. So, and so this is talking about, chapter 12 is more dealing with the Jewish people, whereas chapter 11 was like same time period, but dealing more with the political and religious aspects of the end times. So your people, but at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. So your people is clearly talking about Israel. I mean, again, it's not the church. I mean, this is Daniel. Daniel's Jewish. These are his people. And, you know, there's a false teaching that's been around actually for centuries called replacement theology. And it's basically, in a nutshell, that the church has replaced Israel. You know, Israel fell out of favor because of their rejection of the Messiah, or, you know, their time ended or whatever. And now the church, like all these promises that are in the Bible are not about Israel, they're about the church. And it's like, that is so clearly not taught throughout the Bible. Even just Daniel itself, we can see that that's a false teaching because, you know, even just turning back to Daniel 9 really quickly, where it's talking about the 77s prescribed for Israel. So it's a period of 490 years. The final 7 has still not been fulfilled. And so, and that final 7-year period correlates with the 7-year tribulation, which is to come. So this is, you know, how, I don't know. I mean, I'm just staggered that anybody came up with this teaching to say that it's not about the Jews anymore, because it clearly is just from Daniel, but we can also look, there's plenty of other things we could look at in the Bible, but we're going to flip over to Romans 11 really quick, because that, what, have you guys been reading Romans in your Bible study at work? Okay. Have you finished 11, or where are you? Yeah? Okay. All right. So, but yes.
No test, please.
Huh?
No test.
No test? Well, I was about to say, well, you guys should be able to tell us, you know.
Color commentary.
But yeah, so we're going to look at starting with verse 25, and the heading for that is all Israel will be saved. So remember, this is written by Paul, and he was the apostle to the Gentiles, whereas like Peter was an apostle to the Jews. But Paul is saying, I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers, so that you will not be conceited. A hardening in part has come to Israel, until the full number of the Gentiles has come in. So all Israel will be saved, as it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will remove godlessness from Jacob. And this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. And that was referencing Isaiah 27:9 and also Isaiah 59:20 through 21 is the footnote. And then he goes on to say, regarding the gospel, they are enemies on your account, but regarding election, they are loved on account of the patriarchs. For God's gifts and his call are irrevocable. So it's hard to be any more clear than that. And then he also says, just as you who formerly disobeyed God have now received mercy through their disobedience, so they too have now disobeyed, in order that they too may now receive mercy through the mercy shown to you. For God has consigned everyone to disobedience so that he may have mercy on everyone. So, and we really see this playing out, how Israel is being saved. We see playing out with Revelation 12, which we've talked about this a lot throughout the study, but Israel, you know, they flee the midpoint of the tribulation. They're going out probably to Petra in Jordan, you know, somewhere. They're going to be taken care of for the final 3.5 years of the tribulation, and again correlating with what Jesus had to say. In fact, let's just flip to Matthew 24 really quick as well. A passage we've read practically every Bible study we've had, but I'm sorry, Matthew 24. I'm in the wrong chapter. Matthew 24:15. is about the abomination of desolation, and that's what we're talking about here in Daniel. So, and Jesus says this, so when you see standing in the holy place the abomination of desolation described by the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop come down to retrieve anything from his house, and let no one in the field return for his cloak. So it goes on, but he's talking about when you see this abomination that causes desolation that Daniel was talking about, when that happens in the temple, get out. And so that's correlating with what's happening in Revelation 12 with them fleeing, and it states there 3.5 years for the time period. So I kind of got off my outline here, so let me try to get back to where I was.
No,
All right.
but that actually makes a lot of sense in terms of, I think a lot of times, I've read that verse in the past and been kind of confused about it.
Which verse? The all Israel.
That we should flee into the mountains, because it's like, okay, if we're in Florida, does that mean, we go to North Carolina, or, is that what it's trying to tell us? But it makes much more sense if it's spoken to the Jews there in Jerusalem.
Yes.
Not as some just widespread commandment to the Gentiles.
Yes, exactly. Right. I mean, it's still specifically to the Jews, and we see that is what will happen during the tribulation. And so we see still all of future fulfillment as well. So even though Antiochus was a prototype who did desecrate the temple, there's obviously another situation coming that had not been fulfilled by the time of Jesus. And then within 40 years or so, 70 AD, the temple's destroyed. And so there was no more temple. So, and there was nothing in history that correlated with the Romans when they went in and did the destruction. There's nothing that correlates with the Daniel 9 prophecy, which I'll just read those two verses again really quick. And he, the Antichrist, will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7-year period. So that did not happen at the time of the Romans. There was no 7-year period or 7-year treaty. But in the middle of the 7-year period, he, the Antichrist, will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of the temple will come the abomination that causes desolation until the decreed destruction is poured out upon him. So, and even back to chapter 11, we talked about how Antiochus Epiphanes did desecrate the temple, and that was mentioned like back in verses, 30, and 31. His forces, meaning Antiochus, will rise up and desecrate the temple fortress. They will abolish the daily sacrifice and set up the abomination of desolation. And again, it's like, are these verses seem like they have a future fulfillment as well, because it's like the same thing is going to happen again in the end times. But then when it's, it's still talking about him, and then down in verse 36, then the king will do as he pleases and will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and he will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. And you know what, that kind of hit me. I was reading this before we started, and this didn't really hit me before, but they were just talking about him setting up the abomination that causes desolation, and it's like, in context with that, now he's blaspheming God. And so I think that's all part of it. I think that verse is actually tied into the abomination of the desolation, that he's declaring himself God at that point. And then he will be successful until the time of wrath is completed. And we talked about that. The time of wrath, that is the tribulation. I mean, there was no time of wrath for Israel at this point in time where this was happening. So all that, I don't know, to me it's all like converging. It's so interesting to me to see how it all ties together. So, all right, so really what we're talking about is most of these events we're talking about, it's the final 3.5 years of the tribulation. And we also saw 3.5 years in Daniel 7:25. Let's just flip back to Daniel 7:25 really quick. I have so many notes on my Bible, it's hard to find anything. Okay, and that was where the final empire, the Roman Empire, the Antichrist comes out of. That was the context. It was the 4 beasts, and the 4th beast was this terrifying one. So this is a revised Roman Empire from which the Antichrist will come. So it says that well, and the 10 horns are 10 kings who will rise from this kingdom. After them, another king different from the earlier ones will rise and subdue 3 kings. This is the Antichrist, he will speak out against the Most High and oppress the saints of the Most High, intending to change the appointed times and laws, and the saints will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a times. So there's that 3.5 years. So this is the final 3.5 years of the tribulation. Now this is also the same as the time of Jacob's trouble talked about in Jeremiah 30 verse 7. And that verse I have for you on the outline is, how awful that day will be, none will be like it. It is the time of Jacob's distress, but he will be saved out of it. So again, he will be saved out of it. This is all correlating with the remnant of Jews who flee into the wilderness. And then the great tribulation is Matthew 24:21. Again, Jesus is still speaking. For then there will be, and this is, okay, the context, we just read the prior verses about the abomination that causes desolation, and you need to flee to the Jews. So now Jesus goes on to say, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, and never shall be. So that's where the last 3.5 years, where it's like the great tribulation. And also, if you think about that verse, it's like, okay, yeah, a lot of bad things have happened, but has anything ever happened on the scope of just complete worldwide destruction? I mean, right? I mean, you know, you could say, well, some of these world wars that, you know, involved a lot of countries, but that didn't involve like the entire world. It involved a lot of the countries in the world, but it was not actually every single country in the world. So this final period is going to be encompassing the entire world. All right, so then it talks about Michael, the great prince of Israel, will arise to help. And so we'd seen Michael referenced back in chapter 8 of Daniel, and then was it 8? I think it was 8. And then we see Revelation 12:7 also talks about Michael, and that was where it was the war in heaven, where Satan is fighting against Michael and his angels, and then Michael and his angels are successful, and Satan is cast down to earth. So again, that's like at the midpoint of the tribulation. And then, so then it says that, you know, those whose names are written in the book will be delivered. So this doesn't really specify what is the book, but this would appear to be, it seems just to refer to the Israelites whose names are written in the book. So apparently the book of life, and that's references in Exodus 32 through 33, Psalm 69:28. Those both have references to being blotted out of the book of life. And then let's just look at these ones in Revelation really quick, because Revelation actually mentions the book of life 4 times, starting Revelation 13:8. And so I was like, well, that's pretty cool. Sometimes you don't realize how many times things are actually repeated. But let's see, 13:8. And all who dwell on the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life belonging to the Lamb who was slain. Okay, so there's that. Then Revelation 17:8. And that says, the beast that you saw, it was and now is no more, but is about to come up out of the abyss and go to its destruction. And those who dwell on the earth, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will marvel when they see the beast that was and is not and yet will be. And then we see Revelation 20:15. And that verse is, and if anyone was found whose name was not written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. So that's a pretty serious consequence. And then 21:27, it says, let's back up to 26. And into the city will be, this is the New Jerusalem now we're talking about, into the city will be brought the glory and honor of the nations. But nothing unclean will ever enter it, nor anyone who practices practices an abomination or a lie, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. All right, so not every individual Israelite is like spiritually prepared. I mean, they still have to accept Jesus as the Messiah, just like we do. And then there's a reference in Ezekiel 20, 33 through 38, which I don't know if we have time to read that or not. But you know, as we saw in Romans, Israel as a nation is delivered, but the individual Israelites still have to make their decision. And you know, if they're, you know, it's not like, okay, well, I'm Jewish, so I'm just automatically saved. I mean, that's actually not how it works. And so, but back to Daniel 12. Yeah, so we covered the first. Let's see. At that time, your people. So, you know, when it talks about the people being delivered, again, is that referring just to this remnant? Because we do see that people obviously are being martyred during the tribulation, and because there will be a lot of other non-Jewish people that come to faith during the tribulation, assuming the pre-tribulation rapture is correct. If not, there will be even more people being martyred than we thought. But at any event, you know, those people, they'll be delivered. So, questions on that, comments? I don't know if I explained that clearly. Did I? Is it clear? Yeah, okay. All right, verse 2. And many who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, but others to shame and everlasting contempt. Then well, I guess we'll stop with that. Okay, so verse 2. So it's talking about resurrection, and that's a concept that is taught throughout the Old Testament, and I gave some references here, but I'm not going to look them up. But Job 19, 25 through 26, Isaiah 26, 19, Hosea 13, 14, and Psalm 16, 9 through 10. You know, interestingly, at the time of Jesus, you had the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Well, the Sadducees didn't believe in a resurrection. So it's interesting. It's like, how do you not believe what your own books are teaching? But then again, look at how things are today with professing Christians not believing what our own Bible is teaching. So you're going to have some Israelites who will survive the tribulation, and then they will be joined by these Old Testament saints who are resurrected. So this occurs after the tribulation when Christ has returned. Now, there's no passage of scripture that teaches that the Old Testament saints are raised at the rapture, which that's according to Walvoord, page 370 in the Daniel commentary. So I don't know if anyone has any comments on that. I mean, I couldn't think of anything either, but that was what he was saying. Does anybody have anything that they know of that would contradict that? Because I was always kind of thinking too that maybe when Jesus, after he was crucified and then he rises after 3 days, I thought he went into hell, and I thought he brought out the people, like the Old Testament saints at that point. But maybe not, because really, I mean, this is indicating that these people.
What about Thessalonians, right? Where it says, the dead shall rise first, and then we which are alive shall be caught up to meet him in the air. So if the dead are rising first, who is that referring to?
Yeah, right. Is that just referring?
Just the dead in Christ.
But you know what? It's supposed to be the rapture of the church. So it could be that it's anybody from the church age. So that those that has died, that those people, but I think they're already in heaven, but somehow like their bodies are now raised. And they,
The reincarnation.
well,
I didn't mean it. They get the new body.
yeah, but then like, well, what do they have currently if they're actually in heaven now? I don't know. Some of these things are just a spirit, and so so maybe they're like, because we do see with Revelation, you have those who are martyred under the throne, calling out. You know, it says they're under the throne calling out for justice. Let's just look at that passage really quick, because I don't want to like slaughter it, but it's Revelation chapter 6. It's the 5th seal, judgment. Let's see, verse 9. And when the Lamb opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony they had upheld. And they cried out in a loud voice, "How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you avenge our blood and judge those who dwell on the earth?" Then each of them was given a white robe and told to rest a little while longer until the full number of their fellow servants, their brothers, were killed just as they had been. So, yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, basically Daniel's, it seems to be indicating that the Old Testament saints won't resurrect until at the end of the tribulation. But the interesting point is that the, let's see here. All right, so yeah, the believers who've died during the tribulation, which we were just talking about, they will also be resurrected. And that's mentioned, let's just flip over to Revelation 20, because now this is talking, the tribulation is ended by Revelation 20. And we're into the millennial period. So we see Satan is bound at the beginning of this for 1,000 years. And just as an aside, I was watching a video this week, and it was a conversation about end times, and the one guy was like a Bible teacher, and he was actually interviewing Alex Jones, which I was like, that's interesting. I'm not really a big Alex Jones fan, but he apparently had a whole extensive background growing up with, people in his family that really were big into the end times prophecies and so forth, and he had some knowledge. But the main guy that's doing the interview is like, well, I don't know why Satan's let out after the 1,000 years. I'm like, what? Is like, to me, I think having studied this, and when we did the Revelation study, what you have is the tribulation ends, and there are still people alive on the earth. So those who are, names are in the book of life, they enter into the millennial kingdom. And then you also have all of those, presumably, if the rapture's, if we're correct in our thinking, like we're returning with Jesus, all of the raptured saints and everybody, or all the people that the church age returns with Jesus. So now we're on the earth, and then you have the Old Testament saints coming back at that point, and then you also see, let's see, verse 4. Then I saw the thrones, and those seated on them had been given authority to judge. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony of Jesus and for the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or its image and had not received its mark on their foreheads or hands. And they came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. So it's kind of like all these groups of people who previously died all converging. But you have those who were still alive. Now everybody's going to the millennial kingdom. So during the millennial kingdom, people are repopulating the earth. I mean, I don't know about the people who died. I think, I'm assuming that we don't. If we're coming back, we've already died. But for the people that were still alive, they are now reproducing. So in a sense, if you didn't have Satan ever tempt this whole 1,000 years of people that had been born and were living, and they never had any temptation, then when the judgment comes, could the people who had lived under Satan being a tempter say, well, that's not fair. We had to deal with Satan. That's why we went astray. These people didn't. And it is really pretty staggering that, like Jesus is ruling and reigning from Jerusalem on the earth. We've had this whole thing that has happened, but 1,000 years later, people are still deceived by Satan and go against God. It's like, that's staggering because, but see in verse 5, it says, the rest of the dead did not come back to life until the 1,000 years were complete. This is the first resurrection, meaning the ones who came back to life to begin with. Blessed and holy are those who share the first resurrection. The second death has no power over them, but they will be priests of God and of Christ and will reign with him for 1,000 years. So it's like we're ruling and reigning with Jesus during this period. Now, when the 1,000 years are complete, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to assemble them for battle. Their number is like the sand of the seashore. It's like, that many people? Really? Wow. I mean, that to me is mind-blowing. So they marched across the broad expanse of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints in the beloved city. But fire came down from heaven and consumed them. And then the devil was thrown also into the lake of fire, where the beast and false prophet had already been thrown. And they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. And then after that is the great white throne judgment. So it seems like Daniel chapter 12, verse 2, that's what it's talking about, that the others come to life, but it's actually at the end of the 1,000-year reign to shame and everlasting contempt. So now you're like, okay, well, it seems like it happens at the same time. Like this verse seems unclear. Now there was one guy named Trigeles, I guess is how you say his name. He translated this verse following earlier Jewish commentators, and the way he interpreted it was, "And many from among the sleepers of the dust of the earth will awake. These shall be unto everlasting life, but the rest of the sleepers, those who do not awake at this time, shall be unto shame and everlasting contempt." So that would make it more, that does make it clearer, and it correlates better with Revelation 20. But on the other hand, it's also not unusual for Old Testament prophecies to describe events separated by considerable span of time as if they occurred in immediate relation to each other. So so there are other examples of that in the Bible. So hard to see.
It's interesting in the King James, verse 2 reads, "And many is underlined, many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake." It doesn't say all of them that sleep.
Yeah, actually mine says many as well.
So I guess the point is, only those who are awakening to the first resurrection will come first. And then, so it's in knowing what we know about Revelation, we can read into that. Right?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. So you're saying that because it just says many, it doesn't say all. So yeah, so all, the first resurrection. Yeah. Oh, that's a great point.
There's still some sleeping.
Yes, that's actually a great point. So that sheds light on it as well. So okay, that's why I love doing, like, if I just did this by myself, just came in here and recorded this, which I've had to do a couple times, it's never as good, because I feel like I love the input from the class. So all right, so then verse 3, "Then the wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness will shine like the stars forever and ever." So, you know, we kind of had already seen there was verses about the wise back in chapter 11. You know, the people who know their God will firmly resist him. This verse 32, then 33, "Those with insight will instruct many, though for a time they will fall by sword or flame or be captured or plundered." So again, it's talking about saints being given over at this time period. This is after the abomination of the desolation. And now when they fall, they will be granted a little help, but many will join them insincerely. Some of the wise will fall so that they may be refined, purified, and made spotless until the time of the end, for it will still come at the appointed time. So I mean, the time is the 3.5 years. So, and there was a nice verse in Matthew 13:43 that correlated with that, and that was Jesus actually talking about the parable of the weeds. And then the disciples they didn't understand it, so they asked him to explain it. So in verse 37, Jesus said, "The ones who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed represents the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. As the weeds are collected and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom every cause of sin and all who practice lawlessness. And they will throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear." So, and that even gives the footnote of Daniel 12:3 for that verse. So, so that may shed more light on that verse. All right, so verse 4, "But you, Daniel, shut up these words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many will roam to and fro, and knowledge will increase." So where it says, to shut up the words or close and seal the book, it could be interpreted two ways. One, it could just refer to the idea that the text was being sealed or preserved in a way which would prevent any changes or tampering. Or it can refer to the fact that the interpretation would not be clear until it was reaching fulfillment. Or perhaps both are true. So it's definitely, it's so much easier for us looking back after 2,000 years of the New Testament and church history, and the couple centuries before that, all the history that occurred to bring the fulfillment of all this. It's so much easier to understand now that we're getting to the point. So that could be what it's talking about. Then when it says, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge will increase. So Walvoord thought this was kind of difficult to really know exactly what it meant, and he said that the search for knowledge seems to be the main idea, and he referenced Amos 8:12, which said, and they shall wander from sea to sea, and from north even to the east. And I was thinking, Dean, what you were saying before about north and south and east and west. I'm like, that's an interesting, from north into the east. Like, that's kind of a weird directions. Yeah. And they shall run to and fro to seek the word of the Lord and shall not find it. So that's actually an interesting verse to go back and read in context. But anyways, Walvoord was saying the implication is that efforts to understand the truth will require considerable effort. And I think that's true now. It's like...
Yeah, you think?
Yeah, because you can't just go pull out one, and that's why there's so much false teaching, because if you go and just try to pull out one verse, you can make it say anything you want it to say, pretty much. And even when it doesn't even seem like that's what it's saying, I'm shocked at how people twist the word. But you really have to interpret scripture. You really have to correlate these things and understand the context and history and so much. So it is, in a sense, it's work, I think in some ways you're like, okay, my YouTube videos may not be as popular because it's work more so than just, I can tune into End Times Talk or something where they're just talking about all these things and they have a nice cool video and graphics and all that stuff. So I mean, this is an effort, but anyways, and he said possibly the angel is telling Daniel that the attempts at that time to understand would be in vain, but as the fulfillment draws close, additional insight will be given. But I also was thinking, just because I think I've heard this before, that is it referring to the increase in travel and technology in the end times? That seems likely to me, because it's saying many will run to and fro. So who would have ever envisioned like you can practically, be around the world in one day, like just the ability to travel is just would have been unfathomable to people back in this day and age.
Yeah.
And then and then knowledge will increase. I mean, look at the massive technology explosion. Now we're at this whole point of this AI debacle that's looming on the horizon, and just the amount of technology and knowledge has increased dramatically from back then. So any other thoughts on that one?
It only takes 90 minutes to go around the world, actually.
It only takes 90 minutes?
Yeah, if you're in space.
And from space?
Yeah. 90 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
It's interesting that it says knowledge will be increased and not wisdom. Actually, I think we got less wisdom.
Yeah, that's true.
Knowledge and less wisdom.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Dean said more knowledge, but less wisdom. And I think that is definitely a good point. So, all right. So then in verse 5 through 8. So then I, Daniel, looked and saw two others standing there, one on this bank of the river and one on the opposite bank. One of them said to the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river, how long into the fulfillment of these wonders? And the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and I heard him swear by him who lives forever, saying, it will be for a time, and times, and half a time, when the power of the holy people has finally been shattered, all these things will be completed. So there it is again, the time, and half a time. And that's if you have the 7-year period divided into 2 periods of 1,260 days, because it was based on the lunar calendar of 360 days per year. So, but interestingly with this, all right, recall from back in chapter 10, Daniel's by the Tigris River at the beginning. That's the river he's standing by when he has the vision of the angels. That's where he still is. And then Daniel 7:25 also, I think we already read that. That was also 3.5, the times and half a times. And then when it says the power of the holy people has finally been shattered, so shattering has the idea of breaking something into pieces, and the holy people, of course, are Israel. And the saints are given into the hand of the Antichrist for 3.5 years. And once this period of persecution has run its course, the time of the end will be concluded. So, but another thing that was interesting was because, remember I've said Daniel chapter 8 correlates quite a bit with Daniel 11, which is in the middle of this whole prophecy. And that was also, like, let's look back to Daniel 8, like I think 13 is the verse we want. Let's see here. Because that one we also had, starts out with, the Persians, and then they were going to be invaded by Greece, and that was clearly specified. And then, but I think Daniel was also, wasn't he also by a river when this happened? Let's see. He saw himself in the citadel of Susa in the province of Elam, and in the vision I was beside the Ulai Canal. So he is by the water. And then in verse 13, right before that is talking about Antioch's epiphany / Antichrist. We see that a ruler comes from one of these 4 kingdoms that comes after Alexander, and that we know that's the Seleucid ruler was Antiochus. So from one of these horns, a little horn emerged and grew extensively toward the south and the east and toward the beautiful land, which is Israel. It grew as high as the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the hosts and some of the stars to the earth and trampled them. It magnified itself even to the prince of the host. It removed his daily sacrifice and overthrew the place of his sanctuary. And in the rebellion, the host and the daily sacrifice were given over to the horn, and it flung truth to the ground and prospered in whatever it did. So as we mentioned before when we covered this, that seemed like it went beyond just what Antiochus accomplished. Like, this is really talking about the Antichrist. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to him. So it's like very similar to these 2 other angels. How long until the fulfillment of the vision of the daily sacrifice, the rebellion that causes desolation, and the surrender of the sanctuary and of the host to be trampled? He said to me, it will take 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be properly restored. All right, so back to this. We're going to get back to that 2,300 in a minute. But I thought that was interesting. It's like, again, another kind of correlation between the vision in chapter 8 and then this whole vision is it's like the 2 angels talking, and it's a time, a period of time. Again, they're talking about a time. So, so back to verse 8. So I heard, but I did not understand. So I asked, my Lord, what will be the outcome of these things? And then in verse 9, go on your way, Daniel, he replied, for the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end. So before in verse 4, he tells him to shut up these words and seal the book. Now he's saying that the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end. Many will be purified, made spotless, and refined, but the wicked will continue to act wickedly. None of the wicked will understand, but the wise will understand. So the main purpose of this prophecy was to inform those who would live at that time. However, Daniel was told that at the time of the end would result in the purification of the saints and the manifestation of evil in the human heart. So, the people would still be wicked. So the wise would understand. And so that requires spiritual insight and the help of the Holy Spirit. So we're able to understand, you know, maybe we don't have every little detail fully understood, but we have the outline. We know the main outline, the main events that are going to be happening. All right, so then in verse 11, he said, and from the time the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation set up, there will be 1,290 days. So now the tribulation is 1,260 days, like the two halves. It's two halves of 1,260. So now he's talking about an additional 30 days here. And again, this is and then he says, blessed is he who waits and reaches the end of the 1,335 days. So that's an additional 45 days past the 30. So it's an extra 75 days. So these extra days and the 2,300, I mean, that's the only reference that I'm aware of in the Bible to these other days. So what does all that mean? And then in verse 13 he says, but as for you, go on your way until the end. You will rest, and meaning he'll die, and will arise to your inheritance at the end of the days. So Daniel never really fully understood any of this. It's kind of like, okay, the people at the time, it's for the time of the end. But let's go back and talk more about these days. So new information is given about the 1,290 days and the 1,335 days. And so the tribulation is in two halves of 1,260 days each for a total of 2,520 days. So Daniel, if we go back to Daniel 8, 13 through 14 to the 2,300 days, then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to him, how long until the fulfillment of the vision of the daily sacrifice, the rebellion that causes desolation, and the surrender of the sanctuary and of the host to be trampled? And he said to me, it will take 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be properly restored. So when we covered chapter 8, we talked about this psalm, and honestly, I don't remember what we said about it. Does anybody else remember? I have to go back and watch it, but or look at my notes. But I know we used an article from this guy, Mark Becker, from Rapture Ready, and
Yeah, I just remember all those calculations.
yeah, I tried to simplify it. I tried to make it a little bit easier, but the title of his article is Daniel 8, 10 through 14, and then 12, 11 through 12, 2,300 days. So essentially what he's come up with is like, basically, we can calculate when the tribulation temple will be up and running based on the number of days given in Daniel. And he has three possibilities, and they're all fairly close to each other in days. But first of all, if you just took the number of days of the tribulation, 2520, minus the 2,300, that gives you 220 days. So he's saying if that's the calculation, the tribulation temple will be up and running 220 days after the confirming of the covenant with the Antichrist, which that's the Daniel 9:27 prophecy. Okay. All right. Any comments? Dean, you look like you have something you want to say.
Do we know the exact 3.5-year period? Is it when he goes into the temple and has the abomination? Because what I was wondering, you've got these 1,260 days here, 1,260 days
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
and the reference was to now 1,290, which is an extra month. I'm wondering, was that extra month, could it be like a month before the start of the second half? Or does it actually extend?
Yes. That's a good theory. And one of the second thing we'll look at, this one other guy thinks that there's an extra 30 days, like basically the abomination thing occurs, but Antichrist is really only in full power for like 1,260 days. So maybe there's like a 30-day gap before he really assumes full power. So it's possible, but I don't know. If you look, again, looking at...
Maybe there's a 30-day overlap, like the last 30 days of the first half, maybe that's the beginning of this 1,290 days.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, because if we go by Daniel 9, because that's where he says he'll confirm a covenant with many for the 7 years, but in the middle of the 7 years, he will put an end to sacrifice. So is that exactly the middle? You know, I mean, so, but anyways, okay, so that's like theory one. And then theory two is that for the 1290 days, all right, so you've got Israel hiding in the wilderness / mountains for 1260 days. And we know that from Revelation 12, because it tells us, it gives us the exact information. So, and that's the last 3.5 years of the tribulation. And then, so basically you've got the 12, all right, so then what's happening is there's an additional 30 days mentioned at the end. So the additional 30 days could be for the gathering of Israel, Matthew 24:31, and her mourning for the Messiah, which is Zechariah 12:10-14. So I'm looking at the time. I don't think we really have time to go read all that, but I mean, basically you have, in Zechariah talks about they will look on the one they've pierced and they will mourn, because it's like they're going to realize, wow, we missed him the first time. And so they're finally recognizing him as the Messiah, but it's, you know, there's that. So then you've got the sheep and the goats judgment, which is Matthew 25, and that appears to be what's taking place after the tribulation ends. And because again, Matthew 24 is all about Jesus talking about the end times, and then it goes into Matthew 25 and still on the same theme. I'm just going to flip over there really quick, because Matthew 25 starts out with the parable of the 10 virgins. Then you have the parable of the talents, and then the sheep and the goats. And it says in 31, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. And so then it goes through, you know, more convo. You can go read that later, but basically, you know, at the end of the chapter in verse 46, they will go away into eternal punishment, which is the goats, but the righteous into eternal life. So, so yeah, you might want to go back and read that whole thing later. But, and then also just cleaning up of the abomination of the desolation in the temple. And, you know, I mean, think about it, at the end of the tribulation, everything's going to be a complete disaster. You know, the world's like in ruins. I mean, it's just, you've had like all the cities of the world have collapsed and all these things have happened. Yes. I mean, yeah, Maui times like 1 million or something. So, so it's not going to be good. All right, so then the calculation for this is you've got the 2,520 days of the tribulation plus 30 days minus 2,300 days, which gives you 250 days. So in this scenario, the temple is up and running 250 days after the Antichrist confirms the covenant. So he's basically his thing is more on just when is the tribulation temple up and running. That's what he's using these numbers to calculate, which is interesting because we know that they're ready to go. It shouldn't take them long because all the preparations are in place. They just need the go ahead. All right, so then scenario 3 is the 1335 days. So, which as I said, is 45 days after the extra 30 days for a total of 75 days after the second coming. So because people are described as blessed, like, you know, these are the people, you know, blessed as he who reaches the end of the 1335 days. So maybe that's where the sheep and goats judgment comes in, because, you know, you're blessed if you're a sheep, not if you're a goat, but anyways, so this time period would include the Lord regenerating the heavens and the earth along with every person, parentheses, the sheep, who will enter the millennial kingdom. Plus, you've got to set up and get in order the people of their own nations who will enter the messianic kingdom, and the millennial temple will be built and its sanctuary will be in full operating order. And the millennial temple, that's like if you look at Ezekiel, it's like 40 through 48. It's all talking about this other temple that's going to be built. So the calculation for that is 2520 plus 30 plus 45 minus 2300, which gives you 295 days. So they're all pretty close. I mean, basically, if that's what this is referring to, it seems that the temple should be up and running, you know, within the first year of the tribulation, right? So, all right, so another theory, and this was from this guy, Oxford Bible Church, and he, the link is on your outline and it'll be in the description box if you're watching on YouTube, but he was basically correlating a 7-year period from John the Baptist through Jesus and saying like that was like kind of like, I don't know, but I don't really see that because he's like 3.5 years for John the Baptist and 3.5 years of Jesus' ministry and blah. But it's like, well, it still doesn't fit with the 7-year covenant and the Antichrist and all that. But again, the Bible does have like a lot of types and shadows and patterns. So, I mean, maybe it is just somewhat of a pattern, but he thinks with the 1290 days that the extra 30 days are found at the midpoint of the Great Tribulation. So, and he also comes up with even a few more days because he says at the midpoint of the tribulation, that's when you have the 2 witnesses are killed and they lay in the street for 3.5 days. And then a voice from heaven says, come up here, and they come back to life and go up to heaven at the midpoint. So the 3.5 days, again, that's like, okay, well, just seems like, just a significant amount of time there. So the 2 witnesses lie in the street. So then he's saying, all right, there's now 3.5 days. And he says there's a 30-day interval from when the Antichrist desecrates the temple to his assuming world power. So that gives you 33.5 days. And then the day Jesus returns, he counts a day for that. And then plus an additional half day because it's like a total blackout occurs according to Matthew 24:29 and Joel 2:31, which is where the sun doesn't give its light and the moon, is dark. So he said that probably accounts for a half day leading up to the final day of the Lord's return, which will be a long day of 36 hours like Joshua's long day, which is a type of the second coming. And then he cited Habakkuk 3:11, which actually I meant to look that up and did not. He will again stop the sun and the moon when he appears in glory. So now we're up to 1295 days. And then after Jesus returns, there will be a 40-day period before the start of the millennial kingdom. These 40 days are for the sheep and goat judgment, so that those who inherit the kingdom are blessed. Matthew 25:31-34. They are also preparation days to set up the government of the kingdom, and they also correspond to the 40 days Christ spent with his disciples after the resurrection. So like I said, he's correlating all these days with things that happened during Jesus's first advent. So when you add up all that, you get 1335 days. So, and that, yeah, so his article was interesting. He had a lot of little, not really maps, but like little charts he drew where he maps all this stuff out. Like, I'll just show, that was one of them. He has a bunch in his article. I'll pass it around. So, I don't know, what do you guys think of what do you guys think of that last theory?
Pretty speculative, I would say.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah,
I mean, could we?
I know. Yeah, I'll pass that around.
Unfortunately, we don't know till we know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and really, his conclusion was kind of. I think when we're talking about these extra days, we it's always like, okay, well, we just like, it's the tribulation's only 7 years. What are these extra days? And I mean, I kind of panic and freak out when I see these extra days. But really, when you think about it, like I said, that we are told things that will be happening after the tribulation ends, and so time doesn't stop with the end of the tribulation. It keeps going, and we're going to move into this 1,000-year millennial reign, and then time still keeps going on after that. Then we have the new heavens and the new earth and the new Jerusalem, and this earth gets basically burned up, is what it appears from what the Bible's teaching. So so it's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense that we're going to have these different events happening after the tribulation ends, and that's where these extra time periods will come in. So, yeah, but yeah, other questions, comments, takeaway? I mean, we've now completed 12 chapters of Daniel.
Yeah, that was a lot.
Yeah, Anne said that was a lot. Like expound. What do you mean? Like,
Well, just, yeah, my mind is just exploding right now.
Oh, really?
All that information, all those different numbers and.
yeah,
I thought those numbers were actually kind of good in terms of, hadn't remembered reading this last chapter of Daniel, and the other days seem like, okay, things happen really fast, even though we know things take some time to put in place. It's not that day. You know, so when it's talking
Yeah.
3.5 years, you're like, well, when did it really, like, when did this really transfer power? And you're thinking of that, and I think this last one kind of shows that there's some other dates. These other ones are a bit of, you know, should
Buffer or whatever.
right. They've got a lot of activities going on in them.
yeah. Okay, yeah, that's a good point, Dean.
I guess just building on what Keith said and you earlier, Jesus rose from the dead, and then he was lingering here for 40 days, right?
Yes.
And was he just passing time, or was he waiting until the day of Pentecost? Right? So there was a set time he used to rise. So, you know, if he had been crucified later, he may have only lingered for 30 days. Right? So these things are usually set according to some real divine timing.
Right. Yeah, that's
We
true.
can only speculate on these things.
Well, yeah, but it does seem that the numbers
extra
are
30
significant.
days.
Yeah.
Right, but why?
But why? Right. I know. And that's kind of why I feel like it's not random and there is some reason. And even with that 2,300 days, I feel like we didn't really, even with his article, I mean, some of these articles, I mean, I've had to read them like a couple of times and really think about it to try to grasp what they're saying. And so I'm not sure that when we did chapter 8.
Here's a little nugget to chew on, which I didn't spill it now because I saw it earlier. When we were going through Matthew, right,
Yeah.
when he's talking about, you know, if you're on the hill or if you're on the house, get down quickly and go.
Yeah.
And to those that are pregnant with justice, said, pray. That doesn't happen in the winter,
Yeah.
and it doesn't happen on the Sabbath. Now, why would he say that? Does that mean that we have some influence over the timing of these things? Because why would Jesus wouldn't tell us to pray if it wasn't important?
Yeah.
Why would he say, pray that it doesn't happen here and pray that it doesn't happen there? Does that mean that there's some flexibility in the schedule? I mean, the whole period is 7.5 years long, but
Right.
if we were praying, don't let it be on the Sabbath, don't let it be because of anything. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's really mind-boggling to think about.
Yeah, actually that is pretty mind-boggling because
He wouldn't have said that if there wasn't some opportunity for us to influence things by praying. Why would he tell us to pray that it doesn't happen?
right. I mean, because like, let's say it did happen on the Sabbath, like they still, you can't,
The Jews were so bound by their
yeah,
Sabbath rules that they
Like delay.
delay, and then that's a
yeah.
tragic event.
Well, plus it also seems to be implying that, you know, you're like, well, if this is like a Jewish messianic remnant or something, like, would you really be following?
Would they have relaxed the rules a bit?
Yeah, you know, or would it just be that because it's the Sabbath, things are closed, or you can't, you know, it might make it more difficult to, you can't buy gas, right? Yeah, you can't charge your electric vehicle. Probably that's only something that would happen during the tribulation, is only electric vehicles or something, some sort of hellish scenario like that. So, yeah, that is an interesting point. Yeah, I think the takeaway for me was just looking at this whole thing in context, and just it's like kind of mind blowing, really. Because I mean, I've read Daniel before. I mean, the first one I read, I think I've said this. I was a teenager, and I was kind of like, well, who were the people in history who fulfilled this stuff? You know, because I didn't know anything, and so it was cool to find out the actual history that fulfilled. You know, Alexander the Great and how all this fit in. Because if you don't know that, you're just like clueless. But just seeing everything in context and seeing these repeating patterns and seeing how chapter 7 through 12, I mean, and really the whole thing is it's just this focus, like starting with chapter 2 with Nebuchadnezzar's dream, these 4 world empires that will eventually be crushed by the stone hitting the feet of the statues, which was God's empire, where Jesus will now rule and reign, and he'll crush all the worldly empires. But just seeing how that is such a repeated theme throughout, and all this information that keeps being given, like chapter 7, the 4 world empires, Antichrist. Chapter 8, Medo-Persia and Greece, Antichrist. Chapter 9, the 77s, Antichrist. The chapter 10 through 12, all the same narrative, and again, Antichrist. And end times. It's like, wow, I mean, this is just a mind-blowing book, really. So I think for me, I finally feel like all the pieces came together and I really understand it much better than I did, because even before doing this study, I've been like reading through chapter 12 or 11, like, well, what does all this mean? And so I've been learning right along with you guys, and when you research it, then you really get it in your head.
Well, we appreciate your research.
Oh, well, good. Well, good. Well, I hope you guys have benefited as much as I have. So thank you all for being here and helping me.
Thank you for preparing.
Oh, well, thank you. All right. Well, it's been cool. Yeah. So our next, we're running kind of long, so let me wrap this up. But our next study, I think next week, because we talked about a couple things, like we want to talk about like some more on the Antichrist, and I want to kind of go into some more passages in the Bible that seem to be referencing the Antichrist and talking about who is the Antichrist. Is Trump the Antichrist? That seems to be a question on people's minds right now. So we're going to talk about all that, and then and we'll see how long that takes us, 1 week or a little bit more. But then we want to do what Dean had suggested, which was like we're going to correlate Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. Those are all parallel accounts of the same event, and we're gonna look at all that. So so that's gonna be pretty cool. So, and we'll see where we go from there. But anyways, all right. Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. If you don't know Jesus as your Lord and Savior, today is the day. So you don't want to end up being one of the goats or being deceived and taking the mark of the beast and end up in eternal damnation. So, just believe on Jesus as the Son of God. He came to earth. He died on the cross. Through his death and his shed blood, he paid the price for all of the sins that you and I have committed or will ever commit. And all we need to do is accept through faith who he is and repent of our sins and follow Jesus. So, all right, any questions on that, feel free to contact me or reach out. And have a good one. God bless.